Thanks, Tiego. I think the framework is quite straightforward in terms of what dimensions we actually look into. As Tiego throughout was always just emphasizing, that context is key. Context is key in communication and in dealing with the members themselves, So you need to be able to understand why each and every element of communication exists in your organization and what is its purpose as well, because what you find is all we keep on doing, we keep on adding a letter, an SMS at every particular stage of the customer journey without necessarily understanding what message we're communicating, what action we want that particular member to actually, take. Tiego talked about the decision fatigue. The decision fatigue is real because members end up being bombarded with information and they end up not responding. And sometimes they get to miss important communication where they are expected to actually respond. So once you've looked at the purpose and the context of any particular message and what triggers it, you need to understand if it's still relevant in this day and age as well as part of your business journey as well. The content and clarity, whether, someone that doesn't have the insurance knowledge understands that information needs to be critical and key to how you go about solving for these challenges. One of the most important things that we have found is most people, especially when it comes to growth seems to be in the lower LSM markets, mostly in insurance, whether it would be the funeral policies or it's the life policies that is there. Most of those people either don't have time to read the communication that they receive because they're not sitting in front of a laptop or a desktop. They are on the field, they're teachers, they're blue collar workers elsewhere. So you need to actually, test your membership base to understand, the literacy levels that exist there, the type of profiles that you actually have within your customer base, so that all communication could be targeted to the persona that or pitched at a level that a particular persona will be able to understand it. The tone and the empathy, I've already said, empathy is not feeling sorry for a person, but it's just making sure that you understand them, you listen to them, and you are able to provide the support at the time of need. So once you understand, the different personas, the tone is very important. And I think in the African context, we all know that tone plays a really big role in terms of communication. So you need to understand, that you are not talking to a policy number. Actually, just shared an example, that at a most critical point, we even have people that are gonna call, they've lost a loved one. The least that call center consultant can do when the person is relaying that information is to just, offer condolences. Instead of the first thing is, what's the ID number, what's the policy number? So the tone is very important, and that goes not just for the employees that are actually servicing these members. Tone from an executive level starts at the top, actually. So if you are to be, a company that is empathetic, then empathy needs to be a strategic capability, because it's not a soft skill. So it needs to translate directly into trust. And the way it can translate directly into trust is when internally employees as well, feel that there is trust in the organization. So what happens internally in the organization translates to how they will service the members. So it needs to be one of those strategic objectives for any organization that, we are an empathetic company, and it needs to be measured as such. And I think later on, before we close, Tiego will touch on some of the work around SEMS, which is where we actually measure and track the empathy score. The action and the guidance, this is something that you need to preempt. When you issue out communication, you need to know, what action the customer needs to take. So you can't just send communication to the member that is unclear on what steps to actually take. The customer is not going to take that decision for you. So if your communication is not clear on what decision is needed, they're not going to take it. Mm-hmm. The frequency and the necessity, that is, as much as it appears at the bottom, I think it's an underlying theme because there is lots of information that people are getting from retail, from the banks, from everywhere, to the extent that, if you look at the SMS communication, it's got low penetration now because people are so bombarded with spam SMSs and all of those things, and they end up not reading information. So you need to carefully assess, when is it convenient to communicate with my customers? And that means you must understand your customer in terms of, what type of a persona they are, so that you are able to actually push information to them at a time where their mental capacity is in a right state to be able to deal with such information. And how frequent you actually do that as well, it needs to be driven by the principles above.
That is
yeah.
I really like that question, right? Does this serve the customer or just our processes? Because this day and age, everyone claims they're customer-centric, right? Which means that they should always be thinking about what does this mean for the customer. But we all know, even outside of insurance, pretty much every company is inward-focused.
True.
This is the way we're doing things because this is the way we're structured. This is what our processes are. This is what our policies are. We actually don't care what this means for you as a customer. So it's quite a conundrum from a company perspective and the experience that then the customers receive as a result of that.
Yes, no, that is very true. And I think especially, in the African context, there's lots of this communication which we inherit, either from the systems that we end up using, whether they're from Europe or they're from the US, that we don't even take time to even customize those or personalize them to our industries. And I think that's where, Ajua and Ingenious, this is where they come in terms of actually assessing your environment, assessing your communication to check if it's still relevant, is it serving the needs? Because if you're gonna try and do that yourself and you've always, had this lens and you believe this is the kind of communication that works, it's difficult. As much as, it's a challenge that one can take, like Wycliffe was saying, they've embraced the challenge that they were given. Some challenges you need a different, lens to look at your environment in order to see what works, what doesn't work. And it's so easy to measure these things. And I think in the next slides, we're gonna share some of the outcomes in terms of how you can measure the return on the revenue from this piece of work.